Now look, yeah, that was a double thumbs up. Yeah. Right. I'm very keen to be part of the discussion around the representation review. And I think if I'm going to have to trade one over the other, then it will have to be the other. So, so can we move to the representation review? I mean, the other option is that. Oh well, anyway, we'll see how this one goes. This may take a lot longer than.
I think everybody's going to be in favour of the South Brighton one, aren't they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the South Brighton one's going to take as long as the other one, then.
Is everybody fine with the South Brighton one?
All right, well let's deal with the South Brighton one then.
Can you do it in 2 minutes?
Can we do it reasonably quickly? Because there is one thing that I kind of want to put on the table with respect to this one, and that is that there is the stage 3 notifications that are coming up with respect to the district plan review. So at the moment we've referred the draft chapters to the ministers for comments, and they are due back with us in June, I think. So by the end of June we'll be making a public notification of stage 3 of the natural hazards, the second part of the natural hazards chapter. And that includes coastal erosion and coastal inundation. Now, this area is also already covered in the stage 1 notification that's already public in terms of flood risk. So I think it will be really important in terms of conducting an expression of interest process for the development and operation of a motor camp, that takes place after the public notification of the. This is why this is not in the same time frame as the other one, which is what I was saying. But this notification take place after the notification of the what does he call it? The second stage of the natural hazards chapter. All right, in the district plan review. So I kind of would like to say conduct an expression of interest process, blah, 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 including the, sorry, I apologise. It does say provide information it has in the public domain on the predicted vulnerability of the land to natural hazards. But that's why I want this to be, it says in the public domain, I want that to be after the chapter's notified, because otherwise it's not in the public domain, and it just seemed to me that was one little shortfall in the way that the paper was presented. But I also wanted to authorise officers to conduct discussions with the existing lessees in the meantime, because it may be that with the relevant information that they will not instruct, authorise officers to conduct preliminary discussions with the existing lessees, because there is a lot of community support for the fact that they've been on a month-by-month contract for the last, while since the earthquakes. And there is a lot of support for them, and a lot of... people don't understand why we have to go out to an expression of interest. I understand our procurement policies and processes, and I think it's important that we go down that track. But I don't want the community to feel that we're not disinterested in establishing an ongoing extended relationship with the existing lessees. And if we can take legal advice in the meantime that allows us to have that happen, it just gives a window of opportunity, because we're not publicly notifying the natural hazards chapter, or the remainder of the natural hazards chapter, until June. It just means that there is time for preliminary discussions, and if you were to come back, if you found that there was a solution that fitted within our ability to set aside the standard process because of the nature of the relationship and the negotiations and the discussions, then I would want you to know that you could come back to council with a recommendation that didn't include the expression of interest. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. You don't agree with it, but... No. Okay, so is someone quite happy to move that? Glenn and David, so that's those two. Yanni?
With respect to the fact that because of our procurement policy, I can't see the difference between this and, say, like the Botanic Gardens cafe. So if you've got, my understanding from our policy through the Auditor General's procurement guidelines for local bodies is that if there's a compelling reason as to why you could enter into a negotiation with an existing operator, then you have special circumstances that you can take into account, and you can do that. So, I just want to recheck on that procurement advice, because it does seem to me inherently fair, but maybe we just have to do it. But I personally would like to just negotiate with the existing operator.
Look,
if that's possible.
I agree with you. So, which is why I've added in 5.3. And if we could just take the apostrophe out and say, authorised to conduct preliminary discussions with the existing lessees and report back to council prior to conducting the expression of interest with legal advice as to whether an arrangement can be entered into.
That's great.
All right?
And just the second question I had was...
with them.
When I went out and looked at these facilities, I understand there's one abolition block that's really badly damaged and will cost a lot to fix and should just be demolished. Totally understand that. The other one, which is a really simple structure with a lightweight roof, seems like it could be very easily fixed cost effectively when you look at the money that we're putting in. So as part of this coming back, is it possible to get some understanding around just the costs of the repair? Because I'm just not convinced that the costs we have are realistic. I think they're over, that they're just far too much for what is a very simple structure. And I think that is part of the consideration in terms of getting it open.
There is a question around cost to council. Look, I met with these people before I was elected. The only thing that's stopping them from investing in the site themselves is the fact that they haven't got any security of tenure. And I just think that if there's some discussions, there might be a solution that isn't obvious. I don't really want to get staff to do a whole lot of extra work. They may come up with a solution that is cost effective as well. So I just want to kind of leave that open for the discussions. Well, yeah, okay. Oh, okay. It isn't. Look, I'm going to defer this because I did sort of kind of say this, but oh no, maybe I'll just be late for the lunch. I've got a working lunch that starts at 12. No, I can't. So ask your questions. Yep.
So 2.9.3 seems to me a little bit vague. Add value to the immediate area and local community. Is that when compared to the status quo with the camping ground running at the moment, or is that compared with the camping ground being closed? Because bearing in mind that there are things here that are objectives that we'd want to be met by the EOI, it probably would be good to have that specified.
Things like keeping the tennis courts open, keeping the paddling pool open, generally providing something that complements the values of the local area, complements the reserve next to it.
Okay.
It will be specified, Councillor.
That's great. And in 3.1, there is tree damage and a number of hedgerows are dying.
Yes.
Is that as a result of saltwater
is.
inundation, or is it for some other reason?
We strongly believe, and the professional advice we've received is saltwater inundation.
Okay, thank you. And just one final question, 3.9.3. Ideas for similar uses will be considered at the discretion of the council.
Yeah.
What's the process for that? Does that mean that when the EOIs come in, staff would then have a question as to whether they consider those other activities, and council makes a decision as to whether they will be considered by staff? Is that the process?
That really covers the... it gives the process a little bit more flexibility if a party comes back saying, look, there's a motor camp here, and we would also like to be part of a cycle route. Not strictly there, but it just gives a bit of flexibility to council saying, look, yeah, that adds value and we like that. But it'll be council that makes the decision whether they wish to consider it or ultimately whether they wish to approve it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so debate. Yanni.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to thank councillors Livingston and East for arranging the tour of the facility. It was really eye-opening going out and looking at the site. This is providing housing at a time that we have a housing crisis. There were people there that I met that were friends of a friend who were displaced because of earthquake repairs, and this was the most affordable place for them to go. This is filling a hugely important need at our chronic housing situation that we have in the city. And I think it's really interesting that none of those housing values have really been expressed through this process. So I urge, through the expressions of interest and through the further work, that actually the importance of providing temporary housing for people at the moment is incredibly important, and it needs to be given sufficient weight, particularly when you consider the huge amounts of money that we've been spending to try and find some of these housing solutions. This is actually a very effective, efficient, cost-effective housing solution for temporary housing. There are a number of people here that are simply because of the earthquake, and we know what the rental market's like in Christchurch. We know how chronic it is, the lack of affordable rental housing. So I think this is really important that we keep open and do everything we can to work through a process to recognise the huge value that it has for our local community and for actually our city. The other point is that I know the sea level rise and the climate change issues are real. I know that they are happening. You can see firsthand elements of that. But this is a lightweight motor camp. This is something that can be moved, I would have thought, at pretty short notice, given a few years. So we're talking about a 50-year to 100-year horizon for sea level rise and climate change. So, I think this is a facility that we shouldn't be too worried about in the next, 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 years. But of course we should be thinking about the impact long term. But I would hate for us to displace people's housing and also for the tourism, this motor camp. So I applaud us for trying to find a solution, and I'm happy to support the amendments that have been put up.
Glenn.
Thank you, Anne. I would like to thank you for placing this on the agenda, along with the last item. Obviously, clearly support it. The residents are looking for certainty in an uncertain environment, and at the moment they're picking up ambiguous signals. So they're seeing another public asset further up the road, confirmed by way of the South New Brighton School, and then they're receiving a different kind of a signal from their local council. They are aware of the realities of sea level rise, as are many in the wider community, and I think there have been some good fora in our community endeavouring to engage people over that. Chrissy Williams has been a part of that. I think they've been well received. They are aware of that, and obviously we must stay aware of those, and we will through the district plan process, as the Mayor has said. But as Yanni's also touched on, we've got to stay aware of other realities, which are largely social, including a housing shortage in the city, social stress in the area, and as I said at the start, a need for certainty in an uncertain environment. I'm happy with the EOI process. I've got to stick with a policy that I promoted. And I'm required as a councillor to have an open mind. And so if there is a legal opinion that comes back and says something different, well, I have to stay open.
Yeah,
So,
good. David?
Thank you. Look, I totally support this recommendation as well, and I'll be brief. I think there's been a lot of concern around the natural hazards chapter and other environmental forecasts, shall we say, but I think we've got to be realistic and say even if we agree with the worst of climate change predictions, we're looking 30 to 40 years down the track before there's any significant supposed sea level rise. So that is the life of most buildings and facilities. So I think that we could proceed with some safety for a number of years to continue with this facility, and I'm very keen to see this process go through. Thank you.
Excellent. Phil?
Look, I'll be brief. I support the process too. I'm particularly encouraged with the insertion of the requirement that, in fact, the expressions of interest would depend on the timing, the notification of the rest of the natural hazards chapter. It is just so important for us and everyone to take into account. And with that in mind, I'm happy to support it.
Excellent. All right, I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, John. Now, look, I'm going